All right, let's go ahead and make sure that we get back in fellowship as we're ready to start our second class. This was flashing red, green, red, green, red, green. Is it okay? Seems to be working okay? Okay. Testing 1, 2. Yep. Okay. Let's go ahead and take our normal few moments of silence to make sure we're standing on worship ground. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to continue to study, and we ask now that God, the Holy Spirit, will provide for us everything necessary for a proper study, including self-discipline, concentration, genuine humility, and anything else we might need. And we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we're ready to pick it up with subpoint 2. We are in system testing. Subpoint 2, two double parens around it. We just saw what a system was, composed of people under authority, a policy, and an objective. Subpoint 2 says each system composed of many opportunities of malfunction So each system composed of many opportunities of malfunction presents its own set of pressures and problems. For the believer who must interact with it. Sure. Each system, composed of many opportunities for malfunction, presents its own system of pressures and problems. For the believer who must interact with it. Sorry if I'm going too fast. Because most individuals, so continue the point, because most individuals live by Satan's rules, while in Satan's world, which of course includes malfunctioning believers, okay? So we're not just talking about unbelievers, we're talking about malfunctioning believers too. Because most individuals live by Satan's rules, while in Satan's world, most problems boil down to arrogance, comma, expressed in laziness, distraction and wrong priorities, incapacity and incapability, and and ignorance. See, this is the definition of bureaucracy, right? And you find that in any organization that you work in. We specifically see it amplified at our current point in time, where all of our products are going up in price, primarily because we can't get it shipped to where it needs to go, because we have what? We have laziness. We have individuals who are being paid by the government or have been paid by the government to not work, so they don't work. We have restaurants that can't hire people. We have stores that can't get product because you don't have truck drivers that can drive the trucks there. I was behind a truck the other day, and it had a big sign on the back of it, advertising for help wanted, right? Come drive for us. They will provide the truck. You don't even have to own a truck. There are independents that have trucks. They will provide, what the sign basically says, they will provide the truck, they will provide the training, and after paying for the fuel and your normal expenses, Okay, as a truck driver, you're going to have meals and all that other kind of stuff. So it says after expenses and fuel, all right, the average salary is $2,500 a week. Okay, that's over $100,000 a year, folks, as a truck driver, and they can't get them. You know, I still see people standing on the corner saying, we'll work for food. When you walk 15 yards and there's 5 fast food restaurants looking for somebody to work. Okay? That's arrogance, laziness, distraction. Okay? That's system testing. Okay? You have a system right now called the U.S. government that is distracted by wrong priorities. We've got people flooding the borders. Okay. Oh, you don't think there's ramifications for that? I was talking to my brother-in-law the other day, who works for Borders and Customs. Okay. But that wasn't why he was mentioning this. He's mentioning this because he lives in Tucson. And guess what? The crime rate in the South is now going up, and it's not, you know, every city kind of has its place where you contain the bad crime, right? You know, and the rest of the city's okay. Okay. In Tucson, the crime is everywhere now. And it's being perpetrated by illegal aliens, right? It's being perpetrated by the drug industry. Apparently, I didn't hear it in the news, but I heard it yesterday when I was talking to him. Apparently, we had a DEA officer killed at the railway station just earlier this week, okay, during a drug bust. Wrong priorities, okay? Let's focus on making sure that we can build the right bridge to prevent the darterfish from getting killed, because we have a green environment, okay, and we'll let the rest of the environment go as you have the flood of illegal immigrants across the border. Let's focus on electric cars. That's the most important thing in the world right now. Subpoint 3, 2 parents around it. As a believer, who has to live within a world composed of systems, you will be confronted by system testing, from at least 3 different points of view, : Okay, so as a believer who has to live within a world composed of systems, you will be confronted by system testing from at least 3 different points of view, : inside the system's authority structure, semicolon. And from that point of view, what you have is that you're the person under authority, okay, and you have to deal with an immoral, incompetent, arrogant leader. We've all had those, probably. I know in my 35 years at the company that I was at, we cycled through a couple of those, right? They thought they were God's gift to leadership, and they didn't know anything. It was the Peter principle. They had been promoted way past their capabilities. They never learned anything about leadership, and they thought they would lord their position over everybody, right? You know, so you have that position. Or you're the position, you have the other side where you're the leader, but you're the leader of immoral, incompetent, or arrogant employees. Right? You know, I had that position too. I had an individual come into me and tell me, he was saying, gee, I am upset because I'm not making I'm not making as much as so-and-so right next to me, and he's been in the, company for, 3 years less than me, and I'm much better than him, and blah, blah, blah. And so after he got done telling me all this, it turned out that he had no idea how much money he was making. He was looking at the wrong pay stub. He was looking at one that was 2 years old. At that time period, he had been promoted twice, and I'd given him several raises, so he was actually making a lot more than the guy next to him. Okay, and he had to leave the office with his tail between his legs, feeling like an idiot because I told him how much he was making, and basically I had to say, you know what? That's what happens when you guys share your salaries. Keep your mouths shut. Right? Nobody needs to know how much you make. That's the way it was my generation, but nowadays it seems like millennials or past millennials, whatever that next phase is, they share everything, right? And down to, how much money they make and stuff. But that was an arrogant employee. He was happy until he found out that someone else, or he thought he found out that someone else was making more money than him. Then all of a sudden his happiness went out the window and he came in and decided he wanted to talk to me about a raise, right? It was like, okay. Or you have the individual that's incompetent. I had an individual, I was telling him, look, he was a beginning systems engineer and I needed some work done. I said, I'd like to see you do it this way, and blah, blah, blah. He said, or I could do da-da-da-da-da, which, I listened and I said, yeah, except I won't do this, that we need to have. And I kind of explained it to him and I said, so I would like you to do it this way. And he said, yeah, but I think the way that I'd like to do it is da-da-da-da. And so I said, okay, or you'll do it this way, or I'll find someone else who will. Guess what? He did it the way I wanted him to. It was. I don't mind pushback if it makes sense. If they got a good point and I've missed something, okay, I get it, right? But what he presented was a less productive way of doing it. But in his arrogance, he couldn't allow himself to be told how to do something. Okay, so that's the first way, right? Inside the system's authority structure, semicolon. Outside the system, looking in, semicolon. This is probably the majority of the system testing that we run into. This is when you're trying to get the system to work to accomplish your goals, such as trying to get a human on the telephone. Okay, or trying to get customer service to do something for you. That actually means customer service. Okay, if you've ever dealt with a cable company or the internet provider that you have. I was going to say the phone service, but nobody has phone service per se in their home anymore. It's either their cable company or their internet provider who also provides phone service. Okay, but you know what I mean. Or our healthcare anymore. Okay, trying to get hold of a doctor. First, you have to get hold of their menu system. Then the menu system leads you to someone who's going to interpret what you need to, who you need to talk to and why. And then they're going to get you to a physician's assistant. Okay, he's going to try and answer all your questions, and then you maybe finally get to a doctor. Okay, that's system testing. My brother-in-law was also saying down in Tucson, the crime is at such a level, and the police department's at 30%. Okay, they've got people quitting left and right, and nobody being hired. So the police department's at 30%. So 911 now has hours. It's not a 24/7. If you call 911 when they're busy, when they're not there, they will tell you to call, an ambulance service or call someone else. They no longer are 24/7. So you have outside the system looking in, semicolon, and finally, inside the system looking out. Period. And a case of inside the system looking out is when you're trying to get your job done within a system and you see the relative inefficiency of a bureaucratic system as well as the efficiency of a non-bureaucratic system. When you're a system and your system's policies and stuff are antiquated or they have never been reviewed or whatever, and you're inside the system and you're trying to make the system better, and everybody you bump into says, we've been doing it this way for the last 100 years and it works fine, shut up. Okay? That's inside the system looking out. Yeah, but our competitors are doing it differently and they're going to eat our lunch. Right? Look, we've been making buggy whips for 100 years. The automobile's just a phase. Okay. That's inside the system looking out. Okay. Last sentence. All of these perspectives bring associated pressure and enticement to sin. So you wonder how many phones have been damaged by people, cell phones have been damaged by people trying to get through customer service, finally getting so frustrated they throw the phone down and in the heat of the moment, right? That's kind of like a sin, okay? You need to stay in fellowship and function through all of that, and you need to understand that that's going to happen, right? Subpoint 4. This is 4 with double parens around it. This form of momentum testing is amplified with regard to the SA believer, the stage we're studying, because like the other forms before it, it does intensify in the believer's life at this stage of growth. The intensification is actually a direct result of the maturity of the believer. So this intensification is actually a direct result of the maturity of the believer. What do I mean by that? Well, the next sentence is going to tell us. But the idea is that as you mature, there are certain things that are going, like we talked about, are going to get more and more intensified, and that's because of your growth, not just enticement for your growth. It's a result of your growth. Okay, and this is why at this stage of maturity. So continuing the point. At this stage of maturity, the believer actually has a heightened sense of awareness regarding anything that is contrary to God's plan for his life. Of course, if it's contrary to God's plan for your life, it's going to draw you out of the divine dynasty, okay? But you have this heightened sense of understanding. See, the more clarity you have, the more ability you have to discern falsehood, to discern fogginess, okay? The more clarity that you have through getting mature, getting doctrine, the easier it is for you to understand and to identify problems. And therefore, the problems can, in their own case, become a enticement to sin on your part because of frustration. You can look at individuals and say, why don't you understand that that's a malfunction, right? Because it's so clear to you, but not to them. See, it's like when we were homeschooling, Melissa had hoped that I would be able to teach the kids math a lot easier than she did, okay? But the problem was, because of all of the math that I've had, it was so easy for me that I couldn't understand the problems they were having. I could no longer remember what it was like to have to learn basic math. And so it was frustrating for me to try to teach them, right? Because you wanted to just say, that's the way it is, learn it, Okay, instead of coaching. You know? And that's what happens as we become mature believers with system testing. You understand what a good system should be, and when you see a bad one, it can be frustrating to you. And it can be that enticement to make you want to fix it or get out of fellowship and get arrogant yourself. Look, I know how to fix this thing. Get out of the way, let me do it. Well, you're not going to do it. Satan's not going to let you, right? And it's arrogant on your behalf to think that you can. Okay? So, you have, at this stage of maturity, the believer actually has a heightened sense of awareness regarding anything that is contrary to God's plan for his life. Therefore, where he may have been ignorant of the system tests, when he was less mature, because he simply didn't, quote, see them, end quote, he is now aware of each one as it comes along. Period. That's very similar. It has an analogy in our non-spiritual life, if you want to call it that, where as a parent, you try to teach your kids things, right? So that they don't have to go through what you went through, type of thing, right? You try to teach them certain things, and of course they know better, right? And they end up running into the same problems that you tried to convince them to avoid, right? And they learn by the knots on their head, okay? And then eventually they start to get mature and they start to get smart and they can identify the things that you've been telling them all along, right? And it's the old concept of the older I get, the smarter my parents get, right? Because you start to recognize that what they were telling you was the truth. Well, then what happens is once you have that knowledge, then you can start seeing these other things and you can start avoiding them. Only in the case of the believer in system testing, you see these things and they can potentially play on a frustration level. They can play on getting you out of fellowship because you recognize them more often. If you were in ignorance, okay, you wouldn't see them. But now that you can, you have an intensification of system testing because you have a heightened awareness of what a system is and the problems associated with these systems. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Subpoint 6. There are times subpoint 5. It's right there, right here. What's the problem? It's right there. That's actually 5. Subpoint 5. When confronted with system testing, there are 2 courses of action. I'll continue it. There are 2 courses of action usually open to the believer. He can quit, or he can use the divinely provided power and provision that God has provided him to cope with the pressure including the information associated with separating from evil systems, exclamation point. That last part, I put the last part in there, it's added because there is a difference between quitting and separating from an evil system, okay? The word when I talk about you can quit or you can cope, the idea of quit is succumbing, getting out of the divine dynasphere and stopping in frustration, right? It's the throwing your telephone down by the time you got to the fourth menu, okay, that's telling you to press yet another key to get to somebody, okay? You can quit and throw the phone down, or you can understand that it's a system, it's system testing, work your way through, you're not going to change it. If you actually need to talk to somebody, work your way through and get to the point that you can talk to them, okay? That's one thing. But if you're, say, in a work environment, and you have one of those arrogant bosses, and you're in a situation like that, so you have the pressure from within, okay? You can allow the individual to get under your skin so much that you get out of fellowship and you just quit, right? Or you can cope, you can use divine information to understand this person is a person with that old sin nature, and you can function underneath that individual by staying in fellowship and doing your job as unto the Lord. Okay? Or you can decide based on doctrinal information that, hey, this system is full of those kind of people, and this system is a bad system, okay? And I shouldn't be working here. This is the wrong job, okay? I'm no longer in the right job. The organization has changed out from underneath me, for example. Maybe it was a right job. The organization changed underneath me, and it's time for me to leave. Okay, they are immoral. They are, doing something illegal, immoral, unethical, whatever. You don't have to cope with that and say, oh, God tells me I have to handle this system testing and stay in this organization. No, if the organization's malfunctioning, then you leave the organization. But that's not the same as quitting in the way I was using the word quit, where you quit in frustration. You're quitting because of properly understood doctrine and properly applied doctrinal principles. Okay, there's a difference. Now that leads to subpoint 6, which will make more sense since you had subpoint 5. Subpoint 6. There are certainly times to separate oneself from an organization. Period. If a system's objectives or policies are clearly evil, the believer should disassociate himself from it. I, from personal experience, I had that kind of a situation that I had to look at. I was working for a company who had been a very family-oriented company, had no problem hiring, members of the same family, that kind of stuff. They just made sure that, you weren't your wife's boss or something, right? But they were a very family-oriented company. The founders of the company, the son of the founder, or the grandson of the founder, was the CEO, and the son of the founder had told the U.S. government that as long as the government had an army, okay, then there would be a government branch to this business, right? And they would make sure that the defense industry was a part of their business, and that they would do the best that they could to work for the soldier and things like that, right? And so it was a very, very family-oriented, nation-oriented company. And then the business, the great-grandson, I think, took it over, right? And he started to, hey, get with the times. And they started to advertise their products, started to focus their products on the rainbow community, okay? They started to function and make all of their ads and marketing towards the gay community, right? And they started to do social things like, ooh, bombs are nasty. We can't work in making bombs, right? You know, and a microprocessor that the company produced was found in a landmine, and they said, ooh, we'll never sell another microprocessor to the government that can be used in a landmine. And all of a sudden, so the company was getting immoral. Okay, so do I continue to work for the company or do I leave? Well, fortunately, the decision was made for me by God because the company got bought by somebody else who got rid of all that junk. And the original company went down the drain, and now you can't hardly find anything made from that company anymore. And their stock is very, very cheap. It used to be, you know, in the $400 or $500 a share range, and it's now in the $1.23 range. Okay, so the original company is still around by a thread. The number of employees went way down. Okay, and the other company did well. Okay, but there are times to separate. Okay, and to disassociate. So the believer should disassociate himself from it. Period. Continue the point. Separation is required in these extreme cases, comma. But quitting because of pressure associated with system testing is often a poor decision made from a position of weakness. If the believer succumbs is spelled S-U-C-C-U-M-B-S, to the pressure, if he quits, on relatively mild provocation, he has flunked the system test. You know, my boss said something bad to me, so I'm going to quit. Or my employees, said something bad to me, I'm going to quit. That kind of thing. Or we have customers that are hard to work with, so I'm going to quit. All customers are hard to work with, right? So you have to look at it from a more holistic standpoint, from a doctrinal standpoint. Is the company going in the wrong direction? Are they doing the wrong things? Okay? Are they immoral? Is it time to use your doctrine and say, I can no longer participate in this kind of an environment? Right, I was at that point, right? They were starting to have things where you had to attend classes to talk about the gay, the gay agenda and inclusivity in that kind of stuff, even back then, right? And it was like, okay, where's the eject cord? So it's, let's hope I don't hit the canopy on the way out, right? But you're going to have those kinds of situations. So you have to look at it from that standpoint, from a doctrinal standpoint, and not just react. That's the big difference that we're talking about here, is reaction to system testing. Are you handling it? Are you coping with it as a result of doctrine? Or are you reacting? Okay? Again, if you're working someplace or you're involved in a system, you have a responsibility to get out of the evilness. Okay, if you have to interact with the system because of a product that you have, that's evil. Get rid of the product and buy a competitor. Do something different, right? Don't allow yourself to be pulled down that path. And now that you have lots of doctrine at this maturity stage, you can look at that and say, okay, you know, there. I don't know if this is really a good case or not, but one of the, again, shows that I'm watching has to do with footballers. Those are guys that play soccer in England, okay? And they are the company that was one of their prime supporters, okay, turned out to be a company that was dumping oil in the ocean, okay, close to Nigeria. And one of the players was African, and he went on the football field and he wouldn't wear the jersey because they had the name of the company on the jersey, right? You know, and as a result, they ended up dropping the company from it and blah, blah, blah. But the example was that he was coping with it from the standpoint of it was an evil organization. He could have quit playing football, you know, and which is what he was looking at doing next. But his first attempt was to try to make awareness first, right? You know, and the awareness was enough to provoke people to get mad and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, the idea is, you have to learn the difference between coping, quitting, okay, and separating. There's differences. And we have Proverbs 24:10. So the last part of our sentence says, if the believer succumbs to the pressure, if he quits on relatively mild provocation, he has flunked the system test. Proverbs 24:10, which says, if you slacken, falter, in the day of distress, comma, your strength is narrowed, limited. Period. See, if you slacken or falter in the day of distress, you've made a bad decision. And we know that every bad decision narrows your options. Right? Every bad decision that you make limits your options. And eventually, as you continue to make bad decisions and narrow your options more and more and more, eventually you get to the point that the only option left is to take your own life, to get out of the misery that you are experiencing. Okay? So don't make bad decisions. Do it from a point of strength and not from a point of panic. Okay? It's capitalized because Proverbs are two different sentences, right? And so it's kind of broken at the comma. So it's not your like God. God's strength isn't narrowed or limited. Okay? It just happens to be that, you know, when I did it, I combined the two because in my promises book, it's actually broken here and have a second line. And I just put them up to make them on one screen, and so no significance to it being capitalized. Subpoint 7. 7 with two parens around it. If the believer perseveres in a situation, when circumstances are not ideal, but not evil, comma. In other words, it's not at the point where you have to separate. Even when circumstances are not ideal, not evil, and continues to do a good job, he will be vindicated and promoted spiritually by the Lord. Exclamation point. This vindication comes from residents in the ECS, proper function in the DDA, in the divine dynasphere. The idea is that the believer's edification complex is strong enough to weather any storm if you remain inside. Okay? So just remain inside. We have Matthew 7:24, which I'm going to read to you, but I didn't go through and did do a complete corrected translation. So I'm just going to read it to you, and not fast enough for you to, not slow enough for you to have in your notes, but you can have the reference in your notes. It says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine," and this is the Lord speaking, "and acts on them, may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock." And that's the idea of the edification complex that we have, the divine dynasphere that you have. It's founded on the rock of the truth of the Word of God, and you will weather any storm by staying in that complex, by staying in the divine dynasphere. And you have to have the confidence to understand that. No matter what the situation is that happens, God gives you the power to handle it. That's the point through all of these momentum tests. But with regard to system testing, the system cannot win. The cosmic system, as the overall system, will not win. We know that. Okay? We know that God will be the victor. That the Lord Jesus Christ has already won the battle. The system will not win. Continue the point. Spiritual autonomy. So this is the same point. Spiritual autonomy gives the believer power to understand and put the problem in the Lord's hands. So spiritual autonomy gives the believer power to understand and put the problem in the Lord's hands. That's Psalm 55:22, which we've had before. And continue to function without arrogance, bitterness, implacability. Implacability is the inability to be satisfied, okay? Implacability, self-pity, we're going to go to the garden and eat worms, okay? Hatred, see, if you are in a job or if you're dealing with a system and you say, "I hate this," you need to look at your ability to function properly, okay? Hatred, jealousy, or revenge. The first house my wife and I had built, we bought when we were fairly young, and I think the people thought, well, they're young, they don't know anything, okay? And so as it was being framed, what they did is they framed the house and then they put in the bathroom, well, not all the fixtures, but they put in the bathtub in the spare bathroom as well as the master bath, and before they actually put up the drywall, okay, because they were going to have to do waterproof drywall. And this master bath was going to have a tub, and then it had a shower, and it was all tiled, right? And so anyway, they put in the bathtub. Well, I noticed that something didn't look right on the bathtub, right? And I mentioned it to the builder before they drywalled. And it was, yeah, we know what we're doing. Shut up, kid. You know, you're only 21 years old or 22 years old. What do you know, right? You know? And so they ended up building the house, okay? And we moved in, and whenever you took a shower, the one corner of the bathtub on the upper, you know, not in the bathtub itself, but on the level of the bathtub, retained water. And so when they came to do, an inspection, you got your yearly inspection or whatever, or, your 1 year after you've been there in the new house for 1 year, right? They came in and I said, the corner of this bathtub is retaining water, right? And it's discoloring, right? Okay, well, we'll fix that, right? Well, then, my wife and I at the time were both working, but I was working close enough I could come home at lunch. I came home and the bathtub was removed. It was completely gone. So I asked the builder, what'd you do? And they said, well, they tried to level it with a jack. Or no, excuse me, it wasn't gone at that point. It was patched, right? You couldn't tell it was patched, but they said that's all taken care of. Except it still retained water, and then the patch showed, right? And come to find out, what they did is they tried to level it with a jack, and they didn't block the jack. They used a hydraulic jack. They didn't block it, and it went right through the bathtub. Okay, and so they neither leveled it nor but ruined it instead. So they put a fiberglass patch over there that supposedly we couldn't see, but we could, right? This is a long story. I apologize. I'll make it shorter here because what I'm talking about is this kind of system testing, right? And the arrogance associated with the people inside the system. Because what happened was, okay, after I complained the second time, I said, look, it's still retaining water, and by the way, now it's discolored. Okay, then they said, well, okay, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remove the tub. Okay, they actually broke it and we fixed it, but the fix isn't holding, so we're going to have to remove the tub. The only problem is now they have all the cabinetry and everything in the bathroom, right? They can't get the tub out. So what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to take my wall off, my outside wall. Okay, so they took off my outside wall to get the tub out. Okay. In the process of taking the outside wall off, I'd had a water softener that was up against that wall. It was behind the fence in the backyard. They broke the water softener, didn't bother to say anything, and so my water ran for a day while I was at work. It drained all the salt into all of my flowers and garden and grass and everything, killed all of that. Okay, they took the wall off. The wall was missing, so at that time I had a cat, or two. The cats got out, okay. We had to figure out how to round the cats back up, okay. And then they put a new tub in, right? And then they built the wall back up. Problem was, talking about here, this is what led me to it, by the way, talking about bitterness, implacability, self-pity, hatred, jealousy, and revenge, okay? The house was not a stuccoed house. It actually had wood siding, okay? I come out, and in the backyard is where all of this was taking place, right up against my back fence, so you couldn't see it from the front. But when I went to the back, there's a 2x4 nailed to the outside of the house. So then I call over the supervisor and say, what's the 2x4 here for? I don't know, I'll find out, right? Well, what he found out was the plumbers were the ones that had taken the siding off of the house, and the carpenters were the ones who were supposed to put it back on. Well, when they went to put it back on, the plumbers had actually torn the siding. So rather than put new siding on, the carpenters decided they wanted to make the plumbers accountable, and the best way to do that was to put the old siding back on, and then they covered up the hole that the plumbers made by nailing a 2x4 to my side of my house, knowing that I would notice it and say something, and then the plumbers would get in trouble. All right? So, then what happened was, I'll finish the story here. Then what happened was, okay, they put a new tub in. Well, guess what? Just like everything else, tubs are made with tolerances. So now, when they put the new tub in, okay, the tile that was down in the bathroom was that far away from the tub, right? Because the tub that they put in was a little bit smaller, on the outside than the tub that they took out. So they said, oh, well, we'll just caulk that. I said, you're not doing an inch and a half or 2 inches of bead of caulk around my tub. I'm sorry, right? So they had to rip all the flooring out of the bathroom and put all new flooring in, okay? Well, when they rebuilt the wall, okay, the problem was the shower had a window and there was a ledge, okay? When they rebuilt the wall, they didn't build the ledge right, and the ledge sloped down towards the window instead of down towards the shower, so that any moisture that gathered on the window while you were taking a shower, okay, stayed up against the window, okay, and a year later, okay, the tile around the bottom of the tub started kind of looking weird, and fortunately the foreman had bought the house across the street, so I called him over and I said, Look at this. And he went over and he reached over and he grabbed, and the tiles started all coming off because what had happened is all the water had soaked down and soaked all the drywall behind the shower. Okay? So they had to pull all the tile back off. They had to pull all the drywall back off. They had to bring in heaters, dry out the 2x4s that they had just put in there a year earlier, okay, and rebuild my bathroom again. And the arrogance of that was all of that could have been avoided if when the first time I saw that the tub didn't look right, they had actually looked at it before they built the rest of the house around it. Okay. Anyway, that's system testing. Okay. And that's when I was convinced that a lot of the builders in this valley don't rely on repeat business. What they rely on is that they're going to scare their customers to someone else, but that's okay because that someone else is going to scare their customers back to them. And so therefore, you'll have revolving customers. Okay, anyway. Spiritual autonomy gives a believer power to understand and put the problem in the Lord's hands and continue to function without arrogance, bitterness, implacability, self-pity. Okay? Last sentence. These do not need to control the believer's life because problems exist in a system to which he belongs. Or with whom he comes into contact. Genesis 50:20. And here we have Joseph, and this is after he's been discovered by his brothers to be in the royal court of Egypt. Remember, they thought they had killed him. He got out and ended up in Egypt, and he was able to actually work his way up to where he was in charge of all of the grain in Egypt. And he determined who got grain and who didn't. And of course, the brothers didn't recognize him when they were running out of grain and were afraid of starving to death. And they knew they had to go to the Pharaoh and plead to get some grain. Okay, and they don't recognize him until he says he's their brother, okay? So after he's been discovered by his brothers to be in the royal court of Egypt, okay? This is after they had sold him into slavery due to their jealousy over his position in his family as the beloved one and represented by the coat of many colors, and then followed by his dream of rulership over them, okay? And this is what Genesis 50:20 says. It says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." So the idea is that if you function properly, okay, and you function in a system that you're not supposed to leave yet, okay, God has a plan for you, may have a plan for you in that system, and you may end up causing that system to turn around or to function properly, and that's what happened here, okay? He ended up properly functioning with regard to the grain, and Egypt ended up existing for a little bit longer. And that leaves us ready for point number 8, and that's 8 with 2 parents around it, and we don't quite have time to get that. Okay, so that's where we will pick it up next week.